Welcome to the November 15th meeting of the Rotary Club of South Jacksonville. It's a great day to be a member of Rotary. We ask that you silence your phones and conversations. And if you're attending on Zoom, we ask that you mute yourself, and we welcome you also. Welcome back, Jay. My thanks to Dean Scott for welcoming our guests today. And I'd like to invite Randy Gordon up for our pledge and prayer.
Let's go ahead and start with the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please bow your heads. Dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you for bringing this group of people together to serve you, to serve our community. We ask you to be with each and every one of us, be with our country. Bless this food and nourishment of our body. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Randy. I'd like to now recognize some of our guests today. Vicki Lynn, I understand that you have a guest with you today. All right, thank you. Welcome. I'd like to recognize Bernie and Lisa. This may be the last time we have to introduce you as guests. And so we're moving forward with the process. Welcome again. So a couple of things, talk about family of Rotary updates. I'd like to recognize Ben Samuel's birthday was yesterday, and Christy King's birthday was yesterday. Also, a couple of recognitions for years of service. George Armstrong. George, I think you're here. I saw George. Okay. Has 37 years coming up this November 26th. Nicholas Breeds will have 34 years coming up on November 22nd. Rare not to see Dickens here, but we'll recognize him again. A couple of things, but a lot of announcements today about upcoming events and things. First of all, there will be a board meeting immediately following today's meeting. We've got quite a few things that we need to discuss of interest, and so would ask that we have as many board members as possible to attend. Another reminder, tomorrow morning is our annual extravaganza setup down at the Historic Society there at the Sports Center. We hope to start at 7:30 a.m. and work up until about 10 a.m. Can I see a showing of hands of people who will be coming tomorrow? All right, good. Mike, is there anything else they need to know, people that are coming down for the setup?
Just be there and bring, for the few of you that haven't, bring a sense of taste in order to help us arrange what things are. And if you got a pair of gloves, that might help occasionally for moving the tape.
Okay.
So the more that we have, the faster we get done. And yeah, could sit on the chair. So sounds good.
All right, thank you. Also on your table are the updated sign-in sheets for the annual Salvation Army bell ringing day at Publix. That will be at the Publix at University Boulevard and St. Augustine Road. Please pick a friend or someone you would like to get to know better and help out with this worthy cause. Our day is December 2nd, and that will be on us soon. So the sign-up sheets are on the table. We've got a lot of slots already partially filled. One slot doesn't have anybody on it yet. So let's try to get that filled out so Casey knows who will be attending. I'd like to see at least 2 to 3 people for each shift. That'll help out. Looking ahead, Special announcement about our annual holiday gathering. Robert has graciously extended an invitation again to their home for lunch. There may be a slight change. They're still working out some of the arrangements. It may be on Monday, December 12th instead of Tuesday the 13th. We'll know shortly. It'll be either that Monday the 12th or Tuesday the 13th. So we'll get information out. And as always, if you can carpool there with another member, that'd be good because parking is limited on the streets. And if I remember correctly, always park on the one side of the street on Robert's side, same side as the house. And that'll help for people coming through. And don't block a driveway like I did. Finally, the Downtown Rotary Club is hosting a panel-style discussion with all of the candidates for mayor of Duval County at their lunch meeting this coming Monday. So we have an invitation for any of our members to join them. If you are interested in attending, please get with Patty or RSVP on DACDB. And your members account will be billed if you're not against. So the charge will be $34 a person and can be paid at the door by cash or check, but they do request that you RSVP to the event. They have a similar timing. They start things up at 12 o'clock and the meeting actually starts at 12:30 and runs till 1:30. So that is this coming Monday. All right. What everybody has been eagerly waiting for. It's a continuation of the Paul Harris saga. Mr. Trayer, fresh back from the mountain.
Story time with Bill, ladies and gentlemen.
You know, I never thought about this, but when I read this, our guests have no earthly idea what we're reading. That Paul Harris was the founder of Rotary, and a multi-dimensional, fascinating character. And I studied his life, so I started making these Paul Harris minutes where we just do his life and how he started Rotary. Years ago, started in 1905, expanded to 1 million Rotarians all over the world. So today, this is very early. They just formed the first club, and some of this stuff sounds kind of weird. Paul's new club was officially named in March 1905. They did name it Rotary and continued meeting, rotating between various members' businesses. By the end of June, it became so hot in Chicago that the club suspended meeting in July and August. Obviously, no air conditioning. When the club reconvened in September of that year, they had 19 members. Early members remembered that the, quote, meetings were largely experimental in their character. They tinkered with the agenda, adjusted the rules, made corrections as they went forward. Rufus Chapin, known as Rough House in Rotary circles, described a typical gathering as, when the meal was over, the tables were pushed aside or removed, and we all sat in a huddle. And there was only a partial attempt to keep order or follow a set proceeding. It's not that different. Anyone with anything to say stood up and said it. Special efforts were made to introduce new members. Most members admitted that the primary reason they joined the club was for the exchange of business, although all gave the reason that they stayed in Rotary was because of the friends they made. That may have not really changed. Many of us got in because of the idea of having only one classification, and then 99% of us stay because of the relationships and that we all still enjoy. An early member, John Sullivan, when asked what the most important thing about the 1905 group was, he said, the stunts, jokes, fun, and fellowship that held the boys together. And our hero, Paul, was the arch conspirator and mastermind for nearly all the jokes that were planned or executed during the first couple of years of Rotary. One of the club's favorite rituals was for the newcomers to take off their coats and turn them inside out or leave them off. They were then made to crawl between the legs of the older members I have to put comments, my comment I put in here, this would not be very popular today. It was worse than that, but I left out, never mind. One evening, Paul arranged a boxing match between Harry Crofts, a future president of the club who weighed about 250 pounds, and Les Lawrence, a folding box manufacturer who weighed 95 pounds. The bout ended with Harry carrying Les around the room, playing a mouth organ on his shoulders. I can't make this stuff up. Among other jokes, one was perpetrated on early member Rufus Chapin, a bachelor at the time, occurring at the Virginia Hotel, when an actress was hired to barge in during the dinner with a screaming child in her arms. She demanded Rufus, insisting that he pay her money to support their, quote, love child. I'm not sure if that would work. Anyway, the joke was played to perfection, breaking up the meeting. Everyone on the roof shared a laugh. There's no record of how Rufus Chapin felt about his part in the play. Rotary, as Paul Harris envisioned it, was working better than expected for the 30 or so pioneer members. Trying to keep things uncomplicated, the group established only two objectives: the promotion of the business interests of its members, and second, the promotion of good fellowship and other goals ordinarily incidental to social clubs. It didn't matter why a person came to Rotary, whether for business advantage or to have fun, as long as they accepted these tenets, all were welcome. Still, as more and more men became part of the movement, clouds of discord were beginning to gather on the horizon. Rotary was evolving and changing like its founder, Paul Harris, in ways unimaginable. Next week, the second year, and Paul's trip to Jacksonville, Florida. Oh, okay.
Well, obviously, there were two of us who are brain dead today. So let's welcome our guest today.
Did you already introduce?
Yes.
We here in Rotary welcome you today. So glad you came along, glad you came our way. Our hand of fellowship is yours, sunshine or in rain. We here in Rotary say welcome, come again.
I was on a Zoom call last night, and they recommended that if you have singing at a club, you prepare guests beforehand, so they won't need therapy after.
Our singing is therapy. All right. Let me recognize Lisa Marie. She's been taking people's money for something. Lisa Marie.
This is just for you because I don't do this when you're not here. I'm just telling you, I don't wear this. All right, so thank you in the spirit of Rotary for everybody's philanthropic efforts to contribute to our raffle today. We have actually achieved over our goal. We've raised $105 for Rotary and for the Rotary Foundation. So thank you very much, everybody who contributed. And now, without further ado, we will have one of our guests pull the numbers. Let me get all the money out of the way. How about our speaker? Would you be so kind to pull a ticket for us?
That's the wrong one.
All right, I need my reader to actually read the number. Cane almost had me in rehab.
That's a different rehab. That's different.
I know. All right, the winning ticket number is 3884098. What?
You sure?
Well, apparently not. Unless somebody left some tickets in the bucket. All right, we get a winner, so we have to wait till we get a winner. All right, let's try another one. Hopefully somebody is here. I'm sorry. All right. Try it again. 3884120. All right, John. John has won 2 restaurant gift cards, a little item from Kaiser University. Unfortunately, I left it all on my desk. So I promised John I will bring it to you. And I can guarantee that the value is more than if you spent $10 on 3 tickets, it's much more than that. So thank you all for participating. Thank you, President.
All right, thanks. Okay, at this time, I'll recognize past President Jay Plotkin to introduce our speaker and our speaker's guests. And okay.
Sorry, I feel like I should be hitting a mute button or something so I can speak, but I guess I'm actually here. First of all, before I introduce our speaker, let me introduce who we did not introduce before, an old friend of mine, Brian Putnell. Just a quick war story. 36 years ago, Brian and I started on the exact same day as Smith Holsey. Brian is still there as a partner with Smith Holsey at UC. And since this is our sports theme segment of our speakers, I will tell you that little known fact about Brian for all the Gator fans here that I was always amazed by. Brian grew up in Mayo, Florida with one Kerwin Bell for the Gator fans. At any rate, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Malik Jackson. Malik, as I said, is also with the law firm of Smith Holsey and Busey, and keeping with our sports theme, Malik specializes in litigation and specifically sports litigation. Malik is also a former student athlete and coach, and know for those of you who are experts in former Jaguars, he did not play for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But Malik did play quarterback at Princeton University, and we have a former Princeton quarterback who is not here today as a member of our club, Ron Patrick. But Malik graduated from Princeton. When he was at Princeton, they won the Ivy League football championship in 2013. After leaving Princeton, Malik attended the College of Law at Florida A&M University in Orlando. In his legal practice, as was indicated in the gear, Malik has sort of a specialty in name, image, and licensing. And as we know, or maybe some of us don't, name, imaging, and licensing, which Malik will tell us about, is something that's completely transformed the sports world that we're all familiar with. And so I'm sure there'll be some interesting comments and questions in that regard. Malik is a native of Jacksonville. Many of you may be familiar with his family, which is long public servants and heavily involved in the community here in Jacksonville. He is married to Stephanie, a licensed mental health counselor, and it's our pleasure to welcome Malik Jackson. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Can everyone see that? Wonderful. You need to swing out and do whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to present on NIL. So NIL stands for name, image, likeness, which is very interesting because folks will be on social media and they'll just call it the nil. And it's not nothing, right? It's NIL, and what makes it very interesting is this is pop the top on college athletics. There's no salary cap, there's no collective bargaining right now in college athletics. So however much a willing spender is willing to give to an athlete, they can take, subject to the rules I'll go over. May I get the next slide? All right, so a little bit about me again. Reball IB program, I play quarterback there. I know the laws, and quite frankly, Mr. Putnam O'Brien can tell you, part of my interview process was talking about an evolution in the law. I've been tracking California, passed the Fair Pay to Play Act in 2019. That was going to implement NIL pay in 2023, and then Florida decided to leapfrog. All right. Again, we focus on participation, recruitment, eligibility, endorsements, media rights, and other issues, and they're all related. And I'll tell you, my lodestar for NIL advisement is telling, student athletes to make sure they don't enter any agreement that impairs eligibility. That is the prime focus right now, because the money will come, but if you can't compete, it's hard to get the money. And so I cited to the actual statute right there, and I think that language is very powerful. So an intercollegiate athlete must have an equal opportunity to control and profit from the commercial use of her or his name, image, or likeness, notice the her before the his, and be protected from unauthorized appropriation and commercial exploitation of her or his rights to publicity, including her or his name, image, or likeness, right? So this is an idea that a player, an athlete's right to publicity is obviously broader than NIL, but NIL is a short catchphrase that works for folks. Before I get started, does anyone have a burning question or a question that they would like me to address during the presentation? Yes, sir.
What are some of the things that could jeopardize a player's health?
And I will go into that. That's great. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Whether or not it messes with the fair use doctrine, which normally applies to copyright law.
Very nice. I'll address that too. Anybody else? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so California Fair Pay to Play Act, that was 2019. Florida, we passed our law in 2020, and then we put implementing language in it to be effective beginning July 1, 2021. So California's law was first, but their effectiveness was later than ours. We leapfrogged. And if many of you were aware at that time in 2020, that was a very tense period, because in 2021, there was a lot of questions about other states amending their own laws, right? California has the largest population in America. Florida's number 3. So if the two of the top 3 largest states in our union permit NIL rights, it's going to change the entire collegiate athletics landscape. All right, antitrust warning. During the end of President Trump's presidency, his attorney sent a warning to the NCAA. At that time, the NCAA was discussing making amendments to their bylaws about compensation. And the president, and that was continued during the next administration, during the Biden administration, they said, hands off, don't do anything. And they said it was an antitrust concern. So the NCAA was completely hands off. Mind you, that was in June 2021, in January 2021. The Alston ruling then came out in June of that year. So there was a lot going on at the federal level, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's legislatively, or whether it's through the regulatory space. And this leads to where we are right now. So the Alston ruling, it is not NIL. And so I know it's easy for folks to maybe conflate or to combine this idea of the Alston ruling with NIL rights. They're related, but they're different. As it relates to the Alston ruling, that has to deal with education-related benefits. Now, if you were a creative, person, you might say, hey, I'm a big Gator booster. I think our education-related benefits need to be unlimited, right? Because the Alston ruling said a school can't cap those education-related benefits. So if you term, a car or a laptop or an abroad experience, if you count that in to the education-related benefits, then that can increase the amount of money a school could give to a player. But on the other side is NIL, which again, don't think of NIL as money from a school to a player. Think about money from the external market to a player that has to operate in a school. So schools are not permitted to pay players directly or indirectly for that matter under Florida law. And I want to say that under Florida law, again, I'm a Florida lawyer. I know Florida law, but I also have been tracking different statutes that have been passed throughout the entire country. And what we're seeing is in Illinois, it's permissible for those schools to actually go get deals for their players. So if you're at the University of Illinois, there's actually a young man graduated from Atlanta Coast named Pat Bryant. Very good football player. I think he had a really big catch this past week. He can be in a program in Illinois where they can trawl together deals. There's somewhat of a vetting process for that, and then they can pair up those opportunities. Mind you, that will implicate Title IX. Is it equitable with men and women? But again, this is where it's going, but that's not allowed in Florida. So there's no, the Gators saying, all right, these are all the deals for you, or Florida State, these are all the deals. It doesn't work that way. So it really is a state by state analysis. And it's great for me because I get paid off of it. Right. So proposed federal NIL action. Senator Booker, he proposed legislation that has to do with medical trust, health trust, an independent right of action if somebody infringes on your publicity right. Senator Roger Wicker, he actually had an alternative path where they would regulate it through the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, right? So these are different mechanisms. And then Senators Manchin and Tuberville have been coordinating over the past few months about NIL. They sent questions to all these different conferences in America to get feedback. So they're working on their own standalone NIL deal. And obviously that's bipartisan. And so again, federal movement is happening, but it's hard to try to pass a federal law that may make your local or state school, irrelevant competitively. And so if you're a legislator at the federal level, you want to slow walk that because you don't want to pass a law that leads to your state school, being terrible, quite frankly, because you have to pay the players now. You have to do that. It's expected. National fragmentation. Again, I mentioned Illinois. I mentioned Florida. And I'll go into it a little bit more, but I'll talk about statutes in Florida. But, in Kentucky, for example, they had an executive order. So NIL is triggered through so many different legislative or governmental tools that it really is no one size fits all. But again, protecting athlete eligibility. If you are entering an agreement that makes an athlete ineligible, that maybe doesn't pass the smell test, then that's a pause moment. That's a moment to get an attorney or an agent. I'll prefer an attorney. Earning potential. Earning potential. I think folks are really interested with that. So in year one, most deals are about 3 or 4 figure arrangements, 3 or 4 figures. So we're talking 3 figures, 4 figures. These are month-to-month deals. Sometimes it might be 1 social media post a week. Mind you, those posts are subject to FTC guidelines as well, because now players are treating themselves, they're being advertisers, right? So sponsored ads, things that truthfulness, all that comes into play. Other sports, football jerseys, we're talking about 4% on jersey sales of $140, about $4. That's not able to be shared with the athlete, so that's new. These are subject to group licenses, where a player can opt into putting their name on the back of a jersey and get a percentage of that sale. Now, mind you, it's actually interesting because Florida, you can't pay players directly, but you can only receive that $4 if you opt into the university's third-party administrative plan for that jersey, right? So you can't get the money but for the school, but it's not seen as directly payment to a player, right? So that's a very unique twist in Florida. And in Ohio State, they have more than 1,000 deals since July of last year. All right, and those statistics are good for about a month and a half ago. I have been working on this PowerPoint for a while. But that's important to say because Ohio is another jurisdiction that had an executive order. But again, it really got interesting because Ohio State is another jurisdiction that is now taking some of the marketing functions for their players with NIL. And this is my acronym, avoid pay for pals. That's what I tell athletes, I tell folks that want to enter agreements, avoid pay for pals. So if you're paying a player to participate, perform, or play, it's not permissible. If you're paying a player to attend or leave, it's not permissible. If you're paying a player to stay at a school, that's not permissible. But pay for pals is a really good acronym because it's a way to bind yourself to just staying within the lines because the lines shift in each different state. But if I tell a player, you don't want to be paid or enter an agreement that a piece of that consideration is your enrollment at a school or is predicated off of you reaching a certain point total, that is impermissible. So you want to avoid that. But again, avoid pay for pals. There's 3 Ps in the pals. FAMU, UF, UNF, FSU, and Miami. I'll bring those up because those are Florida schools, but they all have to operate within NIL a little bit differently. So FAMU is a part of the SWAC, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, a pretty historic HBCU conference. UF, SEC, UNF, ASUN, FSU, ACC, Miami ACC. That will control some of the regulation for NIL purposes because many of the regulations come down from the conference office. Miami is private. So they were implementing regulations passed by the Florida Board of Governors. And in those regulations, they implemented the statute that I cited earlier. And in that implementation, it obviously covers FAMU, Florida, UNF, and FSU. Those are state schools, not Miami. So Miami is tasked with interpreting the law as best as they can, but they're not subject to the Florida Board of Governors because they're a private school, just like Bethune-Cookman would be. And so this is my opinion of what I've seen. I think that actually impacted the development of NIL in Miami from the get-go, because you're dealing with a school that's in an area, a jurisdiction that isn't subject to the same regulations as its peer schools in the same jurisdiction, just because it's private and not public. And so I think that's very important to highlight. UF, SEC, if the SEC comes down with rules where they say, we're going to pay our college football players now, we're going to pay our college basketball players now. Well, those NIL rules will confine what a player is permitted to do at UF. Because a part of my analysis for clients is to look at the school's policy, athletic, non-athletic, then you have to bump it up a level. Then you have to look at the conference, whatever is relevant. And then you have to bump it up a level. Obviously, what's the law, which is really what I get paid for. But again, some jurisdictions don't have an NIL law or an executive order. All right. Florida Sunshine Law. Oh, let me back up. I'll start with that. Florida Sunshine Law. There's a disclosure requirement for NIL agreements in Florida. So the regulations I just mentioned, they say that you need to disclose pursuant to whatever process NIL policy of your school. So each school is a little different. Maybe you have to report within 5 days, maybe it's a week after you're into an agreement, but the substance is still the same. The Sunshine Law is a unique twist for NIL for us because there are a lot of folks who, quite frankly, want to know what these deals look like. But a lot of agreements are subject to confidentiality provisions. And so it's about wording a disclosure the proper way, making the minimal amount of disclosure necessary to protect a student athlete, because now, if you put the term or the amount of consideration there for a college athlete, these are 18 to 23-year-olds, right? So you have a lens into their earning potential, which could be dangerous for them. Mandated disclosures, privacy and confidentiality. Again, to hammer on that point, you are required to disclose a contract. And I'll tell you why. There's practical reasons, and there's also just this new market to make sure things aren't going off the rails. And I'll go into more details about what's required in a disclosure. Each relevant contract term that conflicts with a team contract must be disclosed, all right? Okay, I'm at the University of Florida. I want to enter an agreement with Power Rates. I'm out. Does a Power Rate contract conflict with the University of Florida? Potentially. Gatorade was created there. They have an ownership interest, right? They have some value in that. These are the considerations that are starting to happen because the school has to be aware of their contracting parties and how that impacts the relationship with players that are open to NIL now. And then the template. So I think this next slide is, I think, very useful to kind of show some of the considerations. Okay, that's really tough to see. It looks so great on my laptop. All right. So I highlighted a few points, and this is an NCAA form disclosure. So this is not the disclosure. Each school has a different one, or each school says, this is the information that I need to know for your NIL deal. And I want to highlight a few points on there. The NCAA says, for compliance with state law or institutional policies. Remember, I said that earlier. The state law governs. That's the first step in my NIL analysis. But you always need to look at the school's policy institutionally. There's usually again, at Princeton, we have an athletic code of conduct, and you have the regular student code of conduct. You have to sign them all. So each of those agreements are relevant for an NIL discussion. Due date determined by state law and or institutional policy. As I said, at the University of North Florida, for example, you have to report NIL deal within 5 days of entry. So you have 5 days. Now, mind you, they didn't parse out business days, include holidays, right? Because we're early on. I think it's just see how it works. But again, it's 5 days at UNF. That's how it will work under this disclosure form. How will you be or how are you compensated? And that right there is very interesting because and under Florida law, an NIL agreement may not extend past a person's participation in a sport. So you can't enter like a 10-year agreement, right? It's invalid under Florida law. So what we're seeing at this point are month-to-month deals, maybe deals for a half a year, capped at a year. And I think it's very important because the money for this next generation of college athletes is very different. They look at value differently than other folks who might just expect fiat, currency, cash, funds to my account. Folks are interested in like difference in kind compensation. There are a lot of players who get paid by sponsors paying to fly their family to watch them play, which seems it's innocuous enough, but again, that's value, that's income earned to that player, but they now can enter a contract where their family can attend their games and it's totally above board. So we're seeing a lot of different things like that, and then list all parties to the agreement. Again, I think that would implicate obviously confidentiality obligations. So athletes really need to communicate with that administration, athletic compliance, about any concerns they have, obviously upholding any confidentiality obligations. But sometimes you actually need to put those terms in the contract to protect that player, because you have to follow the institution's policies. Again, there's no point in NIL if you can't play. There's no point. I'm responsible. So that's an affirmation, right? And so I'm responsible. And so the I'm responsible, I love that piece of the template because it tells a player, you need to get representation. You need to retain representation, to look through all of this to think, is this above board? And that I'm responsible, at least in Florida, that would lead to one of two parties under the statutory law permitted to advise on NIL contracts. Attorneys with the Florida bar or athlete agents with the FDBPR, that's it. So if you're not one of those two entities, you're not representing college athletes on NIL. Compensation is related to actual use of my name. Now, that's obviously to dissuade the money in a brown paper bag without any work. Like, you know, the booster, you pay him $1,000 to cut the grass, but it's like, did the grass get cut? Like, those are the questions that are now happening. Did you cut the grass? And again, you want to make sure that you're actually doing work. You actually have a work product, a deliverable. And again, that's what I advise our clients, because there will come a point when all the NIL deals are audited. Institutionally, at the conference level, it's going to happen. And so you don't want to be caught out there, you know, in the wash, quite frankly. You don't want to do that. I consent to any investigation, review, or audit. There it is. Right. So you're giving the institution a right to look into that transaction, that deal, to make sure it's above the board, because what the institution doesn't want is you to enter an agreement that then imperils eligibility of a teammate. Or you have to lose games, you're a champion, you have to, you know, lose that value that you created during the season because of one player. An inducement to attend or remain enrolled, that's again the paper pals, avoid that. Next slide, please. All right, so NIL, it's a triangle. Yes, sir.
I have a question while you're on that topic. Taxes, have you come across any issues where, you know, some of these non-monetary compensations, like NFTs, or someone trying to get paid for NFTs, how does that?
So there are two pieces to that. So if you're paying a player with the NFT, that's just an old school valuation issue. You should go to a tax professional, get an appraised, and go from there. But outside of the NFTs, compensation is happening a lot of different ways. I
was curious, like, have you seen any athletes get tripped up with like tax issues because the following year they didn't report their income correctly?
100%. So NFTs aside, that is a big deal because these are college students that by and large have to cross state lines to go compete. And so there's the issue of your domicile, and then there's the issue of where you earn income, right? Where you're earning income. I mean, even if we're talking NFTs, your example got me jumping. No, it's great. The NFT example is great because, and those are non-fungible tokens. Think about like digital pictures, right? So these digital pictures, if you create that digital picture in a certain jurisdiction, maybe you upload your voice on it. That now makes you subject to that jurisdiction if you earn income off of that intangible that was created. So there are a lot of issues about where you earn income, where you live, and how you earn that income. So I think that was actually a great question, but the tax issues are there. You have residency rules for enrollment purposes that don't jive with residency rules for tax purposes. I mean, that's what we're seeing.
I was curious, like, if eligibility because I don't know if any of these institutions have rules where like we must stay tax compliant or like that affects your eligibility. Because they took this social media deal for $100 last year, they're now potentially going to be suspended for the season or negative consequences.
I think the only implication for an athlete at this time as it relates to taxes, that's a mandate from our legislature, is it's like a 4 to 5 hour tax and literacy course that's mandated under the statute. They say if you're gonna let these athletes get NIL, they should have a professional come in that's not selling them a service, that's not hawking something to them, that can tell them about the tax issues, the reporting requirements, the 1099s, the independent contractor issues, withholding, right? The $5,000 in flights that your grandma, had to come, right? That's your income. It happens. It definitely happens, especially when you start thinking about basketball players and things like that, folks that have to travel. If I want to get a player to contract with me, I need to maybe offer him something special or her something special that maybe push me over the edge if I have competitors. I think I'll get your family in every one of your games. That's happening. That's happening now. So the tax issues are there, and the universities don't want any control over that, right? They don't want to be seen as employers. They don't want the players to be seen as employees. They're not trying to withhold anything, right? So this is really the players on the player. Their onus is to get representation.
Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. If you have any questions, please ask. And then the triangle. Just think of NIL as a triangle with 3 different sides: players, schools, companies. That's it. That's it. So my professional understanding is predicated off of that structure. And if it shifts, I can modify it. But I think that's great because if you think of the players, you think of the family. If you think of the family, you think of the friends. Those are people that will be in the players on the player side of the triangle on the leg. Schools and the conferences. University of Florida will probably have an alignment with the SEC, which may have an alignment with the NCAA. That's to be determined. But again, that's where the schools, conferences leg will go. And then the NIL entities. These are entities that want to enter agreements with players for NIL. And they just don't know what to do. They don't know how. They want to make sure they follow the law, that the player doesn't get jammed up. But they want to engage. And so the points on the triangle are your attorneys and your athlete agents. They connect, right? And that's the structure right now. The practical considerations can only be an attorney or agent in Florida, right? Underage athletes, if you have a minor. So full disclosure, my brother went to Florida at 17 on a football scholarship. He went at 17 years old. If he entered an NIL agreement, would need to go to the circuit court to have that contract approved. Now, this is really in the weeds right now because there's only a very select group of athletes that are talented enough to go to college and to be an athlete at 16, 17 years old. But you can think of certain elite sports, folks who may accelerate their high school enrollment. Again, my brother was able to go early because he was an A student. So he had credits in the bank, he was able to bring them over. But there are families now like Quinn Ewers, for example. He graduated high school early, went to Ohio State. He went to Ohio State there. He was there for a little bit during the summer. He unenrolled and went back to Texas. They had more money for him now. Now, the money is not from UT Austin, but UT Austin is about to surpass Harvard's endowment. So because of oil, right? And so right now we're at a spot where college athletics is truly going to be controlled by folks who are not in these institutions directly. Underage athletes, back to that point, you have to get the contract approved. You have to get it approved. So you enter the deal, you have to go to the circuit court. So that's just a different hoop, quite frankly, in following the process to emancipate. And it's the probate or guardianship court. Residency and immigrant status. If you earn income, if you have employment, that'll mess up your visa. And so a lot of athletes who are here on a scholarship, they're here for academics, right? But they play a sport. Well, now amateurism is amateurism, but isn't anymore in college athletics. So how does an athlete address that? Well, it's a very tough situation because the athlete needs to talk to the administration, which probably has an office that deals with immigration, but that's a federal function. So even, what the state says you may be able to do, it's really going to come on to whatever federal guidance comes down. Unaffiliated boosters, and that's very funny, but under Florida law, you need to be unaffiliated with the post-secondary educational institution to enter an NIL agreement. So that unaffiliation is really important because it says I'm not paying money from FSU to this player, or on FSU's behalf. The issue is, at what point, how do we determine an affiliation? Is it, if I was a booster 3 years ago, am I a booster now? And, if I've given X amount of dollars over my lifetime, am I always a booster? These are issues that have to be fleshed out. NIL agreements, fair competition. So I have 4 categories of NIL deals. All right. So the first category is fair competition. Any NIL deal with performance enhancing drugs or, relating to gambling on your sport, don't do it. Don't enter it. I think there's a colorable argument. I think if you're in Vegas, if you're not in Nevada and you're a college athlete, right? Maybe to my next point, vices maybe wouldn't be seen as they class A to enter an agreement with a sports book or a gambling operator. But again, I think this is a good framework. So again, fair competition, no PEDs, no performance enhancing drugs, don't cheat in the game. Next, vices. Do not, enter an agreement with adult entertainment, tobacco, alcohol. Don't do it. Third, particular business relationships. That reminds me of Florida, Powerade, right? Particular business relationships or particular circumstances of the school. So my great example is BYU. BYU is a Mormon institution. You cannot enter a Starbucks contract. It's a unique twist, but that's what it is. If you are a student at BYU, a part of their student code of conduct is that they're not supposed to do certain things. And one of those things is caffeine, right? So if you were a BYU student, you want to enter the largest Starbucks contract ever, that wouldn't be permissible through your school. And so those are the considerations you need to have. And then 4, that's my catch-all. If I tell an athlete, if you're not doing one of the other 3, you're good. So that's number 4, right? That's it. That's my framework. Payment issues, receipt, taxes, rights tracking, consideration of fiat or crypto. Cash is cash. Cash is king. The dollar is very strong, but these athletes are very interested in crypto payments. They might look at it as a property and investment. They might hope that it appreciates later. So that's something to be aware of. Rights tracking, I'm going to get back to that. Taxes, we talked about that. I appreciate the question. And receipt. They're college students, so they might message on their phone, maybe on Facebook Messenger, maybe through TikTok. So there's almost like a check-in component with these college athletes, which brings me to my rights tracking. Athletes at the beginning of NIL were granting any and everything. Because they could get paid off of it. But you don't know how valuable your rights are until the market develops a bit and you can really gauge, right? There's been an infusion of players at schools already who may be sophomores, juniors. When they see the incoming freshmen come in, they're reassessing their NIL because the freshmen reset NIL every year. So if you're already a student on that team, how much you getting? You find out you're receiving less than, and you've been a starter, you've been, contributing to the team. Those are things that are going to bubble up. But for the rights tracking, athletes are sometimes granting exclusive rights to multiple parties, and I don't know how you do it, but they're doing it. Okay, they're doing it. So it's really important to make sure that people are tracking, and again, that's where we come in. It's a lot of rights management work, especially when you have an individual grant of rights or a grant of rights to a collective, a group licensing deal where everybody gets a portion. Very different schemes, but they're permissible under NIL. State, Florida, Georgia, NIL statutes, executive orders, Ohio, North Carolina, Kentucky, right? And so again, that's the legal framework, and Alabama has no NIL law. Alabama's fascinating. Now, I just personally follow Alabama. Brian is one of the first people to tell me because I gave him all my ideas about where I thought this was developing. And, he just said, whatever you do, just make sure you keep an eye on Alabama. He was right. Alabama passed the NIL law the first year. They repealed their law in the last legislative session. They said it was too restrictive on what they're trying to do. Yeah, absolutely. And Tommy Tuberville is now in Congress, right? He's a senator. So these are ball coaches, right? But in Alabama, they made the choice to have no NIL law because they had one on the books and they think it would open them up. That's fascinating because they don't have one, but they did. So in our circuit, Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, everybody's doing it differently. And Georgia's president is actually one of the most consequential administrators right now. He's a part of the NCAA D1 board, right? That makes a lot of the rules. So it's very important to see Florida. We were the first. We leapfrogged Cali. Alabama, they did, and they said, never mind. And Georgia has a president that is extremely involved in NIL and NCAA changes. Enforcing disclosure, unintended consequences. I talked about that a little bit, but the unintended consequence I'm seeing is, we had a client that had an issue determining the extent of a rights grant, of related rights from a school. So if you have a school, and let's say you have a logo on the jersey, or you have a particular backboard that's used, can that player use those marks with their own IP? What does that co-branding look like? Do you have to get consent from the institution, or is that insufficient? Do you need to get consent from the actual counterparty with the institution? That's popping up. So what we're seeing with at least the co-branding space, a lot of folks don't know if rights that the schools were granted by these apparel companies, these Adidas of the world, Reeboks of the world, can the school grant those contractual rights in a group licensing plan with its players, the 4% I talked about earlier? Can they do that? It's to be determined. But it's really up in the air. And right now it got really tense because, the apparel companies now see that they bumped it down a level. If you are, again, Reebok, Adidas, Jordan brand, we're talking about considerations for 21 and 22-year-olds, junior, seniors in college, maybe you go pro, to now bumping that conversation down a level to high school to see if I want to go to a certain school because I might have certain rights available to me from an NIL perspective. That's happening. Immigration and visa issues, again, that's enforcement. That's very important. If you have an athlete or if you know someone who's an immigrant and has visa status, they need to have an attorney with them every step of the way. And they need to talk with the administration on the front end of the deal and on the back end of the deal. NCAA uncertainty. The NCAA recently promulgated additional rules about current student athletes. So they're bifurcating prospective student athletes and current student athletes in their treatment. And that's logical, right? If you're a player on my team, I can treat you differently than a player that's not on my team, right? That makes sense to me. But the NCAA keeps promulgating new rules that actually lead to more people being confused. And they can't one size fits it all. I mean, they said a booster includes these collectives that I'm sure some of you may have heard of. Yeah. So the collectives are fascinating. Collectives are these groups of donors that want to fund NIL activities broadly. So you can have a donor advised collective, just one, just a big wig, or collectives where it's multiple different donors that contribute to that. And they're set up sometimes where they get the deals, where they execute the deals for them, or sometimes they just pay the player. I mean, it's all over the place. But the collectives are interesting because they implicate the reporting and disclosure requirements, because a lot of collectives are affiliated. That's probably not the best term. A lot of collectives have some level of relation to a school, some level, whether it's an alum, whether it's somebody, a former player. I mean, it's all over the place. But again, that's kind of to be determined. Minors, I pretty much discussed that. Early enrollees, minors, Florida, California. My great example, if you have a San Diego airman, kid out there, the kid is really great at football or basketball, plays multiple sports, how about that, football and basketball. The kid has entered NIL, which is permissible for high schoolers in California, not in Florida. Not in Florida. So Florida, no high school NIL. In California, there is high school NIL. But the tension is if that father is reassigned to Pensacola, what happens to that player's eligibility when he has to cross state lines? What does that look like? What does the conversation look like? Yes, sir.
On that note, so kid lives in California.
Yep.
I'm in Ohio.
Yep.
Can I start paying him an NIL deal?
Is the kid a college athlete or
He's
a
a
high
high school kid.
If he's high school, yes.
I would love for him to come to Ohio. I have nothing to do with
So
it.
that's fascinating you say that. So that implicates the pay for pals, the inducement. And so there can't be any sort of term predicated off of that player moving to your state. But if you want to pay the player 7 states away because you care about him, been following him, that's permissible. It's when you start adding things on it, like contingent upon you, boom. Or I need to see you, boom, right? But you absolutely can. In California, now in Florida, that's not permissible, not for high schoolers. But the same principle applies to college athletes too. Yes, sir.
You said that most of these deals are 3 or 4 digits.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about, an agent or a Princeton lawyer, that it takes to understand this, that doesn't sound like 3 or 4 what, digits.
Yeah, no, the value of the legal advice isn't marrying up right now with the value that's being created for NIL. So I had an awesome opportunity through my firm to represent a company in the NIL space, which is very different than a player in the NIL space. Right? And so that's actually one of the things we focused on, right? Again, that's part of my triangle analysis. Not going to go the institutional side, but the player or the company, I think that can work. And I don't think it actually conflicts because you need to know what both of them want. So that's pretty much how I handled it, but yeah. Yes, sir.
Are you able to get E&O insurance?
Come again?
Are you able to get E&O insurance?
You say insurance? Yeah, I mean, so, so we're seeing, at least for the collectives, they have to do it, right? So a lot of times they're looking over a lot of agreements and they're getting E&O, but the only insurance that we're seeing for athletes right now is loss of value insurance. If a player gets injured, to protect their potential salary, but the insurance products that aren't created yet right now are based off of NIL. Like loss of value insurance policies were predicated off of being a 1st-round pick or a 2nd-round pick at that point. But now we can actually base that value off of NIL deals. So, hey man, all I say is this: I don't need it. I'll read the law. I'll read the law. I'll read the law. And you know, it's
Let a shareholder answer that one.
yeah. Now I have professional malpractice, obviously, but again, for this area is so new, but that's something that everybody in the marketplace understands. You understand that, you know, there are going to be some mistakes, but also it kind of helps you if you know that there's going to be a change by the NCAA in a month or 2. Yes, sir.
2 more questions. Does this in any way, it's looking forward, I know we're talking small change right now, but expand it. Does it in any way open up the Pandora's box for the unimaginable? Say a foreign country, we'll say Saudi Arabia, comes in and says, I want to kind of take over a league from within.
You can't do that with a conference, but again, that would be subject to the disclosure requirements. And I would think if you're contracting with a foreign government or an agent of said foreign government, it will rise to the level in whatever athletic department that you had to disclose it. Now, if you don't disclose it, that's a different bag of worms. But yeah, I do think that that's happening already with elite athletes, especially if they're immigrants, right? They have a lot of support to get them here. Certain basketball players, certain sports, hockey players, for example, which they can professionalize earlier too than most sports. So it really depends on the sport. But I absolutely consider it.
One more question.
Yes, sir.
So can a student athlete now, can I sit here and sign autographs and sell my own autograph?
Yeah, you can. You just need to disclose that to your school.
So along that, am I allowed then to sell my athletic memorabilia, such as I win a ring? Can I sell my ring and not get NCAA?
That is a tension. So there's a tension between selling something that is given to you in your, I guess, in your role as a player versus you getting a piece of apparel that you bought and you put your IP on, right? At this point, I haven't seen examples where players are selling their team memorabilia with their co-branding.
Well, because they're bringing it because Ohio State got in trouble for that.
Yeah, it's not allowed. It's not allowed. You're not supposed to use team equipment and then put your image or whatever on that equipment, your signature on that equipment. You can't do that. That's not permissible, but it is happening. We were actually, when I was at Princeton, they told us, don't give away your clothes. Like, don't do that. But you think about, but obviously, you know, people will sign something, right? You sign your workout shirts. Oh, this is such and such player's jersey they worked out in it. The university does not want that because you're using it.
We signed something saying like our girlfriends couldn't wear our practice just undershirt home.
Yeah.
Like, no, you do not let them leave your room.
That's my understanding of the law and how that works. All right, so any other questions? I know you said 2 more, but
if you could stick around.
Okay.
Okay. Malik Jackson. I want to give you, this is a, what we call a four-way test point of Rotary. So take it, read it.
And good luck with this deal.
You know, Jay was talking about meeting him and everything. I talked a lot of times about me mentoring people in the legal community. I didn't mentor Malik, but I mentored your mother, which shows you different generation here. All right, just a reminder, next week is Thanksgiving week. We will not have a luncheon meeting. Our next meeting will be November 29th, when we'll have a presentation on the Rotary Foundation. And once again, a reminder, there's a board meeting to follow, set up tomorrow morning for the gingerbread house. And as we end our meeting, if you please stand and join me in the four-way test of things we think, say, or do. First,
Is it the truth?
second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
third,
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
fourth,
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Was she sick for a while? 89. Had dementia, we had her in assisted living.